The Belgians. What do we know about the Belgians? Well, we know that a lot of the smartest people in history were Belgian. On all sides of both world wars came from Belgium. I'm not sure how much you guys know about some of the other inventors. Most of these great powers didn't come up with these things themselves. Matter of fact, they were against them until they were already created. Well, there were sacks of skin that had air in them, and they would go down with the diver. That's a submersible. A submersible is different from a submarine. You can live in a submarine. A submersible, no, you've got a very short time limit. And it's probably human powered. That's why the Hunley is a submersible, but it's not a submarine. And the Turtle was not a submersible, or was a submersible and not a submarine. The length of the voyage ain't necessarily the ultimate goal. If you got a ship that can go 2,000 miles, well, when you're on a wartime patrol, you may burn a lot of that up just sitting and waiting in an area and making sure that your batteries are charged. Now we've got modern submarines, nuclear powered. All of these submarines, modern submarines, are run off of electricity, just so you know. Whether it's a diesel electric, a nuclear electric, or a steam electric, yes, there were steam powered submarines. I believe the K and M series, it would be the M series from Great Britain, I believe, were steam powered. I'm probably wrong about that. I know that the M series were used first as giant batteries. I don't mean a battery as in positive and negatively charged. I mean they took battleship cannons off of pre-dreadnought battleships. That means prior to the dreadnought battleship created by Great Britain. And they put those on it. I mean, these things up close, if you'd fired one of these things point blank within 200 yards or so of the Yamato, not that you'd have gotten that close, but if you could have, yeah, this would have gone clean through the ship. At that range, it would have gone at least clean through the belt armor. Up close like that belt armor isn't going to do you any good. That's a straight shot. Now, Mr. Lee is the one who created the Turtle and piloted it. He did all of the jobs of a submariner, and this is the first. We want to give it credit for being the first submarine purpose-built for war, but, I mean, really, it's not. A lot of those air sacs back in the day and diving bells were created for wartime purposes and used for peace. There's also the advent of many things that Leonardo da Vinci himself was involved in that turns out are very old. When it comes to ball bearings invented by Leonardo da Vinci, come to find out that ball bearings were an invention. It was aboard the Lake. Da Vinci created a diving bell specifically for excavation of the Lake Nemi ships in Italy. In Italy, the Renaissance, that was the rebirth of Roman education. The rebirth of knowledge of things like a keystone, things that seem so trivial today, things that everybody should know. It's a matter of typing it up on your phone and all of a sudden you know it. but somebody had to figure it out before you. How many of Leonardo da Vinci's ideas came from the advent of the diving bell? His diving bell, which is not much different from diving bells created by the Phoenicians, or by the Greeks, or by the Romans. Yeah, very similar. So, of course, when we look through the history of submersibles versus submarines and John Holland, and of course the electric drive submarines, you know, weren't run on gasoline or diesel, they were run on kerosene. Yeah. And of course there's lead acid batteries. Why do they use lead acid batteries? I mean, these are probably the crappiest, cheapest POS batteries that you could get. Well, it's because the resistance in them, because they're lead acid batteries, makes it so that you can't use it all up at once. But it also creates gases that are hazardous to your crew. And the expense of maintaining the filters, and of course the wear and tear on the machinery, power and electricity, so that you can filter out toxic gases such as chlorine that'll kill your entire crew. We had several United States submarines during both World War I and World War II, and of course Russian submarines from World War II, where the crew died because the filtration system that's supposed to keep the chlorine gas out of the submarine wasn't working. Now the Hunley, just like the turtle in the Revolutionary War, was hand-powered. Well, the Hunley was also hand-powered. It was powered by people power. Demokratia. People power. That's literally what democracy means, is people power. Well, we like a little bit of assistance, don't we? And them electric engines are helpful. The diesel engines, the kerosene engines, the gasoline engines, the steam engines that are attached to the propeller shaft in a submarine. Whoa! They don't. All they do is power a generator. They power a generator that powers the batteries in the electric motor. And when you're submerged, that electric motor is run purely on the batteries. So, the thing is that Mr. Holland invented a proper ballasting system, a water ballasting system. The Hunley had a lot of problems. Its ballasting system was open release. Now, we have a class of submarines called the Gato class. And the Gato class, we had on our fuel tanks, of course, the ingress and egress valves. It's for the intake and exhaust of water. That's right. Water. Why would you want water to get into your submarine? Well, there's two hulls. There's an inner hull, that's your pressure hull, and it's got a lower pressure than the water around it, because the water around it, well, you don't want that compressing your body, it'll kill you. So the pressure hull is on the inside. It's basically a giant propane tank that you're standing in, but not filled with propane, of course. Outside of that is where your fuel and all that stuff is, and your ballasts, which is for raising and lowering the submarine. And those are managed by opening ports that are on the top of the outer hull and on the bottom of the outer hull. As we know, gravity works. Heavier items tend to drop while the lighter items tend to rise. So air being lighter than water is going to want to rise. If you open the top ports, the air is up there. You open the top ports, and of course that water, or that air, gets to escape that hull. It's no longer trapped there. And that allows water to come in through the bottom, and it makes it so that it'll sink or raise up. But also what it does is that ballasting system, as far as your gas tanks go, if you can imagine having your gas tank, right, in your vehicle, well, it's filled with liquid. Liquids are heavy. So, of course, with the opening being on the top, any air or vapors are going to rise like they're supposed to. They're not trapped in there. Now, if you're underwater, you've got kind of the opposite thing going on. So, since you've got oil that you're running your vehicle on, or diesel fuel, which is lighter than water, you've got the valve that's at the bottom, and you use the water pressure basically to act as your fuel pump. I mean, it's already pressurizing it. All the oil is at the top. Now, on the Gato class submarines, we had the valves at the bottom of those tanks so that we could let water in and out whenever we wanted. Problem is, if one of those valves gets stuck, then the outside hull is not a pressure hull. It doesn't equal pressure. And in order for it to function, it has to have equal pressure inside of the tank as out in the seawater around it, because it's got a much thinner hull. Now, if you get one of those valves so that it's stuck shut, then you could quickly and easily create a problem where you're going to deteriorate or destroy your outer hull that's holding your fuel. You may result in it getting compressed and giving you all sorts of issues because of that, and creating stress fractures and leaks. And next thing you know, you're screwed. Now, we've got a lot of people who were pretty well against the idea of submarines. And we had a lot of people who assumed that they were smart enough to run something they never had any business touching. That's why the Hunley went through so many crew members before it ever sank a ship. Now, of course, the Hunley was in the 1860s. And, of course, the Turtle was in the 1770s. I mean, we're talking just a little over 100 years. Or a little under 100 years, sorry. And then, of course, it advances from there. Mr. Holland and all of his stuff. I mean, he was able to make stuff that was working and functional in the 1870s. I mean, this is just after the Civil War. And he makes for us a pretty nice submarine. The United States kind of sort of wants it, and he wins a contract. But, of course, we've got a submarine that was created by, oh, God, I forgot his name again. I'm sorry. Holland. Mr. John Holland. One of his submarines actually sank here in the United States and has not been found. You can look up the name of the river that it was lost in. He was trying to tow both of his vehicles out of there. 2 submarines. I want to say Phineas Ram, and the other one is called the Holland 6. Very cool ships. Anyway, a lot of the concepts that he came up with, you know, we tried to make them better by adding more stuff and adding more weight. And we soon realized, like on the Gato class submarines with those valves that would open and close, we realized we don't have to have a valve there that opens and closes. I mean, standard procedure before you raise the sub out of the water is to drain the tanks anyway. You drain the ballast tanks, you drain the fuel tanks, then you bring it out of the water. If it's not out of the water, well, then your oil isn't leaking out. Your fuel is not leaking out because it's buoyant. Just like air, it's buoyant. Matter of fact, you can use fuel inside of a hull that is, you know, made of solid steel. If you fill it with oil, it's still going to float, depending upon the amount of displacement. We know that displacement is the amount of water, the volume of water that you are displacing. If I push this cup down into the water, and what is it, a 20-ounce cup? If I push it down all the way down to the 20-ounce line, which is about right here on it, and I push it down into the water to about right there, I'm displacing whatever the volume is in here. I guess 20 ounces liquid is what I'm displacing. That's how much volume 20 ounces worth, but I don't know how many cubic inches that is. And then you got to do the comparison of what's in this cup versus what's outside of it. If I had a solid chunk of concrete in here, and that solid chunk of concrete weighs more per square inch than water, then it's going to sink. If that concrete has a whole bunch of air in it, a whole bunch of air bubbles, like say, all right, you know, you go to the 50-cent machines, right? You put your money in and it pops out those little plastic bubbles. And I got one in here I could show you if I could find it. But it's airtight. When you mix your cement, let's say you mix it into a cup about this big, you could fit probably 3 of the big ones or about 15 or 20 of the little ones in here. And you mix that in with your cement. Well, this is actually going to be lighter weight, more than likely, than the water around it per square inch, because you've got so much of the volume in here that is just air. And then the plastic is lighter than water, you would hope. Depends on the plastic, though, doesn't it? So we got a lot of stuff that we come up with. And we like to think that we're superior. You know, we take one person's achievements. That's their achievement. They did it. It's their achievement. And we like to use it to represent our greatness. We just love to do that, don't we? We like to hug on somebody else's success, don't we? Yes, we do. We want to love on that success. We want to be able to say, oh, I knew that guy. If it's somebody who's famous for saving the world, you're like, yeah, I knew that guy in 3rd grade. And you're proud of it. Of course, if it's somebody who's accused of being a serial killer, you're like, man, I knew that guy. He was creepy. Even if you were best friends and the guy never did you wrong a day in his life. Nope, as soon as you hear a rumor like that, you start right in with the fucking jive, don't you? What we've got here is a series of progressions. Now, being a submersible, the turtle was definitely something that was useful, but it was not the first submarine used in war. The Hunley was not the first submarine used in war. It wasn't the first submersible to sink a ship in war. But we give these people credit for it. The reality is, Holland's designs were the first ones to actually be modern submarines. They weren't hand-cranked. They were also created so that the Irish could sink some British ships. Well, that didn't end up happening. Matter of fact, Holland's designs that were, well, financed so that he could sink British ships were later on financed and bought and traded for by Great Britain. Now, how great is Great Britain? A lot of the greatest stuff that we got, it came from Belgian inventors. And we got all sorts of assumptions about the Belgians, similar assumptions to the Poles, or Polish people. Well, the problem is, you know that the Polish people got screwed over in World War II. You know it. They got screwed over in World War I as well. But they got a nation of their own out of it. And then they lost that nation because Great Britain wanted to be allies with Joseph Stalin. Really, they needed to be. Joseph Stalin, the United States, and Great Britain did not need to work together for that to be successful, though. Stalin had the numbers already. If he'd have made it a war of attrition, the Russians were going to win no matter what, and that's exactly what he made it. But also, because we were friends with Stalin, the reason that Great Britain got into the war and France got into the war, to begin with, the Poles and the Belgians. The Belgians got Belgium back, but the Poles, they didn't get Poland back. No, they had to fight tooth and nail for that. And we like to give ourselves a pat on the back, don't we? Oh, well, we Americans did this, and we Americans did that. You Americans also looked away to horrible atrocities committed by your own government and by your own people. Via means by way of. I gotta try to get some help with this stuff. I gotta try to get an advocate to help me turn this in, and I have to wait for people to have time, which I do need to make a video about. John Holland, he had this idea of having submarines for war that would scare people into just not fighting wars anymore. Isn't that stupid? I'll make a weapon so terrible that nobody will ever want to fight a war again. And when in the history of ever have people not gone, hey, you know what? That's actually a good idea. Even the threat of nuclear weapons, nuclear fallout, was not enough of a nuclear deterrent for our governments to not be idiots. That's Great Britain, United States, Germany, it don't matter. When it comes to submarines, we want to push the German stuff a whole bunch, don't we? The U-boat menace. Yes. Absolutely. As I've been studying submarines, I've been noticing some pretty cool things. Like, first of all, none of the submarines that I actually like, none of them have guns on them. The ones whose shape I like the most. I don't like the giant dildos we use now. The shape of a hull of a modern submarine is different from what they used to be. In World War II, it was something that John Holland himself had a complaint about. Even on a ship that's supposed to be underwater, these officers insist on having a deck to strut about on. The pompous nature of being a naval officer. The belief that somehow you are superior to others. And you should gloat. You should put out your chest and put those pins and medals on there and show you are suave and debonair. Really, John Holland built the goddamn thing. All you're doing is fantasizing about your magical world you'd like to live in, where you are this hero who saves everybody, but you don't get to do that, do you? Nope. And Mr. Holland's invention didn't get to save everybody either. Matter of fact, it nearly took Great Britain to its ultimate destruction and demise. I like the Type 21 U-boat. I like the Type 23 U-boat. I like the Holland U-boats or submarines. The ones I especially like, Germany's Cash Cow, and also they had a ship called the, and it's very rounded. And although they've got variants of it that have guns on them, it was it is a war submarine. It was created as a merchant vessel, a blockade runner. That's my favorite. I'd rather have a blockade runner. I've been looking at a lot of midget submarines. The Deutschland wasn't very big, and the Holland 1 through the Holland 6 weren't very large. The Seehund submarine made by Germany, and the British X-Craft, and the Italian CB series submarines. They're roughly about the same size. Between Holland 1 and Holland 6, I believe Holland 6 is about 3 times the volume, 4 times the volume, something like that, of the Holland 1. But basically, all of them in the Holland series would have been considered mini subs in World War II. That includes the Deutschland. It was a large merchant submarine, but it was a small submarine as far as submarines go. You could, in the amount of space inside of one of the Holland submarines, if you were to clear everything out that was in there, you could fit my car in it. And if you did the same thing with the CB series, you could put my car in it. Same with the British X-Craft. The Seehund, I think as far as wide as the Seehund is, if you cut it in half and then drop the car in there and then put it back together, like put the submarine back together, just put the lid back on it, it would probably fit. Now, obviously, it's not going to drive into a Seehund. It's not going to drive into an X-Craft. It's not going to drive into a CB. It's not going to drive into a Holland. That's not the point of it. The point is that they're not just relatively small, they're tiny. The Deutschland, the internal pressure hull is about the same volume as the Holland 6. So I mean, it looks a lot bigger than it is because it has such huge tanks that go all the way around it. And like on the designs of them, when you look at the deck on it, it's kind of like the cash cows, the Mark 14 U-boats. They got a lot of volume for fuel. Most of what they did was refuel U-boats. That's what the Deutschland's job would have been, and that's what the Type 14's job actually was. And the Type 14 was a variant of the Model 4, or Type 4, and they were designed in World War I. The submarine tenders, basically. Now, we had subtenders as the United States. We did have some submarines that did go back and forth to, deliver fuel, but most of our submarine tenders were Liberty ships, or LSTs. That's a landing ship tank. I was looking at a picture of 3 submarines refueling on the Pacific, and I'm looking at the ship that's refueling them, and I'm thinking to myself, that kind of looks like a Liberty ship, but it's got that front end on it that opens straight up, and, the picture is taken from about sea level, like somebody's on a boat or a rubber raft, not far from the scene. And then there's a few of them from the sky that they take pictures of them. And yeah, the LST, landing ship tanks. One of those pictures, it's actually an LST out on the Pacific Ocean filling up submarines. There's a lot of stuff that, is fresh innovation. It also shows, if you look back through the history of it, I mean, the first battle sub made for the United States was made during the Revolutionary War. It was called the Turtle, and it was made with the same technology that you would make a barrel out of. A wooden barrel for sticking your wine in. Same technology. That's what the hull was made out of. Wood! Wood and iron bands. But it didn't run under its own power, and you had about half an hour before you started getting carbon monoxide poisoning. Or carbon dioxide poisoning. Then, of course, you've got the Hunley, same thing. I mean, those guys, by the time they got out to where they were going, as small as that thing was, it's basically a cigar tube. The guys couldn't even stand up in the thing. When you were in your position, in your seat, you were stuck there. If you were the first guy into the sub, if the submarine sank, you had to hope that everybody else in the submarine got out, because if they didn't, you were stuck. You were stuck behind them. There was no room for you to maneuver around their bodies to get out of the thing. The Hunley was sunk 3 or 4 times before it ever sank a ship. Now, the Holland 6, being as it is in a river somewhere here in the United States, it'd be great if people would go out there and check for it. Try to find out ultimately where it did end up. I mean, if you can find the Hunley, and the Hunley was made, 20 to 30 years before the first Holland ship was built? Well, if they can find the Hunley, and they can preserve the Hunley, they could probably do the same with the Holland 6. I believe it was the Holland 6 that sank, because I'm fairly certain that it was the Holland 6 and I want to say the Phineas Ram, but I don't think that's right. Now, the thing I like about the fatter submarines like that is that, all right, on the Type 14, it had a sharp bow. Basically, it came together like an axe head, like you would expect on the Type 21. The thing I like about the Deutschland is that it kind of looks like somebody shrank a Type 21 and then stretched a inner tube around it and then inflated the inner tube. It's got kind of a fat, rounded look to it. It looks pretty cool. And it's got long range to it. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be having one of those submarines. When I made a thing on Facebook called Trash to Treasures and Airplane Enthusiasts. And part of that, I was trying to make a Swords to Plowshares thing. Find alternate uses for military technologies. And what I found is that military technologies are too beefed up. It's wasteful to use them. You could make a submarine with an excellent pressure hull out of #1 recycled plastic bottles. Sorry about that. Disconnect. You don't have any need to go 900 feet under the water like a Type 14. Or 250 to 320 something feet for a Gato class submarine. I mean, really, in a submarine that's meant for civilian use, your purposes for going underwater is to either A, explore, like such as reefs, leisure activities. Of course, that is considered leisure activity. And then there's diving below a storm. At 100 feet, even if there's a Category 5 hurricane going on above you, 100 feet below that hurricane, you're not even going to feel it. So if you create your pressure hull so that you can go down that far, and you're not looking to be depth charged, you don't have any reason to have a pressure hull that has inches in thickness, made out of solid iron or solid steel. Just not necessary. Now, with each of these people, we like to talk about how these people are representative of us. And we want to talk about right now, especially, the immigrant debate is oppressive. All of us are descendants of immigrants, and most of the stuff that we like to claim as ours came from immigrants or the children of immigrants. The only people that didn't immigrate here were Native Americans, and they have contributed much too. Anyway, I got stuff. I just had a bit of anxiety and quite a bit to say about the advent of submarines and people taking credit for shit that ain't theirs. Also, to bring up the fact that Great Britain and the United States were quite influential, as well as the French, in making, creating, and maintaining designs for submarines prior. I mean, the French had made submarines back in the 1600s and the 1700s. The French had made submarines back in the 13 and 1400s. Or, sorry, submersibles. But Mr. Holland was the first one to make an actual submarine. Alright, good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper and no victim left behind. And like I said, the homeless here in the United States are being driven out into the sea. Why don't we take the trash that is here and make ourselves some seagoing vessels and get the fuck out of this country?